Good evening. Welcome to another edition of Business Today, where we deal with the in-depths of business world and all its dealings. Today, as always, we got some exciting segments here at Business Today. And first off, we're going to be talking to a guest in the personality segment. And it's a pretty interesting segment. It's a sector that I myself am very curious about, a little bit engaged in as well. It is towards the civil aviation sector we are going to be talking about. We are going to talk to the chairman of the Civil Aviation Authority, and who he is, let's take a look.
Mr. Ananda Wimalasena is the chairman of Civil Aviation Authority. Prior to this appointment, he was the chairman of the Airport and Aviation Services Limited. He is a science graduate and an accountant by profession. Mr. Wimalasena has wide experience in both the private and public sectors and is a product of Ananda College, Colombo and University of Ceylon. He has held many other prestigious positions as the founder managing director of Archery Hospitals Limited and chairman of State Pharmaceutical Corporation.
All right, so Mr. Ananda Wimalasena is here in the studio. Welcome to the show,
Thank
sir.
you.
Great to have you here. Now, of course, you're here representing the Civil Aviation Authority. Can you give us a brief introduction as to what that body is?
Yes, the Civil Aviation Authority is the regulator of civil aviation in the country. In between the two world wars, that is between 1919 and 1939, there was a rapid development of the aircraft industry, but mainly in the military sector. Then, and also during the war that continued, the aircraft became a very important weapon in the military field. But towards the end of the Second World War, that's in 1944, a number of Western governments realized the potential of the aircraft to service mankind. So, but they understood that there has to be some kind of regulation, because especially if there are international flights, you see, from one country to the other. So each country could not have its own way of flying and management of flying. There has to be some kind of standardization. So taking that point of view, the American government in 1944 called for a convention called the Chicago Convention, with 55 major countries participating who were interested in civil aviation. There they had a very important discussion and formed an association called Provisional International Civil Aviation Organization, PICAO. Now the function of that organization was to see that international air travel will perform in an organized, secure manner, ensuring safety of the aircraft and the passengers. That was the fundamental concern at that time. Then further discussions took place, and in 1947 there was a convention in Montreal. This is just after the formation of the United Nations, you see, under the auspices of the United Nations, where a formalized agreement was made, and the International Civil Aviation Organization came into being, which is called ICAO. Now that is the organization which regulates all civil aviation travel right throughout the world. Now at the moment there are 192 countries who are members of this organization.
When did Sri Lanka join the organization?
Sri Lanka joined this organization in 1947, just before independence even. So we are a party to this, to all the conventions, regulations, and we call them SARPs, that is standard and regulation practices, you see, of this organization. And there are about 12,000 such rules and regulations and practices which all the countries who are members of ICAO are bound to satisfy. The the sole purpose of this is to ensure regulated and safe skies.
Now, talking about the domestic operations in Sri
Yeah.
Lanka, how many domestic operators are there?
At the moment, there are 11 domestic
11.
operators.
So they conduct all these flights in the country. So what is the registration process for a domestic operator to get the certificate
Yes.
of airworthiness
Yes.
of Sri Lanka?
First of all, the plane or the helicopter they have must be registered with the Civil Aviation Authority, for which there is a certain process, you see, and certain requirements about the manufacture and other details about the organization and its capabilities, its maintenance capabilities, etc., and of course the operating staff. You see. So it has to be registered, and then the aircraft or helicopter, whatever the equipment is checked to see whether it's airworthy, and we issue a certificate of airworthiness. So those two are essential for any flying operation in the country.
Now, apart from the operations like the flights and everything, the other important part of that organization is pilots.
Yes.
Now, I believe a lot of pilots are there in Sri Lanka. A lot of people have done the PPL. Do you have the number, or
I don't have the number.
but there are around?
Yeah, quite a number. Yes.
There's a large number.
I think even at present there are about 300 students. You see.
Wow. So that's, I mean, quite a large number we can imagine. So they have to be registered with the civil aviation, and they have a specific condition, set of conditions
there
as
are
well.
basic requirements, basic education requirements, and basic physical requirements as well, physical fitness included. Then they have to obtain a PPL, that is training license. Even they have to undergo certain examinations. You see. And then once that is done, they are issued a license. From using that license, they can start their training process.
So those examinations are administered by the civil aviation?
The Civil Aviation Authority.
So now, considering domestic operators and the pilots, how often do they have to go back into civil aviation to get their licenses renewed?
Annually.
Annually? Every year they have to. So if for that set of sales, they have a physical examination?
Yes,
or
physical examination is essential for pilots
Okay.
and air traffic controllers for their ratings. You see.
So now talking about the Sri Lankan situation, a lot of domestic operators are there, but talking about the airport facilities, how are they right now?
Now the domestic operators are mainly based at Ratmalana, except Cinnamon, which has a base at Katnayaka, you see. So they operate through Ratmalana, and the most important function they are performing at the moment is training pilots. They have their own flying schools which operate from Ratmalana.
So that's the main responsibility of it. Now, of course, in Sri Lanka, of course, there are a lot of regulations because there was a war in Sri Lanka. So how is the situation for pilots now? Actually, we had an attack on April 21st, and I believe a lot of restrictions were put in place.
For a short time.
Time. So are they lifted right now?
Now the training restrictions are lifted, but still the pilots, the trainee pilots, cannot fly into the city. They have to fly south of Ratmalana for their training flights.
So what are the proposed improvements that civil aviation has in store for the Sri Lankan airport industry or the aviation industry?
There are a lot of projects in hand. At the moment, we have initiated a project to develop the Palali airport. You see. When Air Ceylon was flying, Palali was one of the airports which was used as a regional airport. There were flights from Palali to various South Indian airports, but subsequently those flights were suspended, and during the war, Palali was used only as a military airport, and all the flights, even carrying civilians, were military flights handled by the Air Force.
And now, talking about the domestic air operators, are there regular flights in Sri Lanka done by anybody at the moment?
Not at the moment, but now once we develop Palali, there is a crash development program for Palali. Within the next couple of months, Palali will be made available as a civilian airport. Initially, to fly propeller aircraft up to a maximum of about 72 passengers. Now already Batiklo is a civilian airport where similar conditions apply. So those two airports, Batiklo is operational now. Palal will be operational within the next couple of months. And subsequently it will be developed into a regional airport where flights can commence from Palali and travel to regional airports like mainly South Indian airports.
Now, of course, then that means most of the flights in Sri Lanka are done by chartered method. So
private flights.
Yeah,
yes.
private flights. So what is the process for a private flight to get their clearance for a flight route?
Yes, for a private flight, there has to be a clearance from the Defence Ministry, followed by a clearance from the Civil Aviation Authority, and then liaise with the airport company to get the landing facilities, etc.
So these can be done over the phone or over the email?
Yeah, over emails. Yeah.
Over emails, okay.
On the web.
So now, of course, you joined the Civil Aviation Authority, I believe, 3.5 years ago.
3.5 years ago.
So how has your experience been at the Civil Aviation Authority?
It was a very rewarding experience. A lot of developments took place during the last 3.5 years.
Can you just continue?
Especially now in 2016, we had to relay the runway at Panel-NGAP International Airport, which was 30 years old and not had been fully repaired since then. So that was a very interesting exercise, you see, and it was completed within 3.5 months and very successfully done as well. So that was one of the most interesting experiences. And subsequently, the development of all these other facilities. So those were very interesting and rewarding experiences.
Now, can you actually elaborate on a little bit about the Civil Aviation Authority's responsibility when it comes to airports? What do you guys handle all the airports, or is it certain sectors?
All the civilian airports.
All the civilian airports. So there are a couple of airports that are under Air Force regulation as well. Yeah. What are the responsibilities?
Now, Panel-NGAP International Airport is a civilian airport. Of course, the airport also uses it for their flight operations, but it's managed by civilians as a civilian airport, and that's our main international airport. So the Civil Aviation Authority ensures that the flights are safe in the first place and proper standards are met, and security in all respects is covered. Those are the main functions.
Main functions when it comes to an airport.
Yeah.
So what about the airports that actually are outside your purview, operated by Air Force regulations? Do you guys...
No, the Civil Aviation Authority has no say in military matters. That's the practice world over.
Okay.
Or the Civil Aviation Authority in any country doesn't deal with any military matters or military flights.
Okay.
They're completely independent of each other.
So when it comes to the Sri Lankan aviation industry, what changes have you seen in the 3 years you have taken office?
There has been developments as well as setbacks. The setbacks are, as you said, the 21st April incident, which was a huge setback for the aviation industry. Because up to that time, our passenger numbers have been increasing between 7 to 8% every year regularly from the end of the war. Actually, immediately after the war, it increased by about 15%. But during 2015, 2016, 2017, and 2018, there was about 8% increase. And last year we had approximately 10 million passengers using VIA. So there was a very steady growth, and we were expecting about 11 million passengers this year. But unfortunately, because of the incidents and as a result of the curb in travelling and tourist arrivals, this year I don't think we will achieve even 10 million. So that was a big setback.
I guess the main revenue generator for the Civil Aviation Authority is probably the Panel-NGAP International Airport. Am I correct in that matter?
Yes, to some extent, yes.
So what current projects do you guys have at the Panel-NGAP International Airport that are about to take place?
Yeah, Panel-NGAP International Airport, there is now, it was designed to handle 6.5 million passengers, the present airport, the present terminals. But as I told you, the last year it was 10 million passengers, so it definitely was working beyond its capacity. So there is a there is a plan to increase the capacity to 15 million, for which already the plans have been finalized, finances are being arranged, and it is at the final stage of commencement of construction to have a second terminal to increase the capacity up to 15 million passengers.
So about how many flights does the BIA usually handle?
BIA usually handles about 200 flights a day.
200 flights a day, that's it.
37 airlines are flying into BIA.
Now, considering that margin of passengers coming into the country, the domestic air operation has been improving for the last couple of years. But right now, is it at the level you guys expect it to be?
No, there's definitely room for growth in the domestic industry.
So what proposals do you guys have for the growth of the domestic air?
Yes, so what we are doing is development of the airports to facilitate movement, as well as the government is envisaging sort of something like a subsidy scheme, because the problem in Sri Lanka is compared to other modes of transport like the railway or the bus service, air travel is expensive.
Yeah.
So therefore the demand for air travel is less from the local population, not from the tourists, from the local population. But now to sustain the industry, for tourist operations are not sufficient. You see, there has to be a corresponding increase in locals using air transport. So with that in mind, there is a scheme has been proposed to bridge the gap between the revenue and the cost, even for private operators, if they can present a good case, you see, so that prices can be kept at a reasonable level to encourage Sri Lankans to use air transport.
So these are subsidies that are still in discussion.
And there is a certain amount of concurrence in those discussions.
So now, mainly I think a lot of the operators in Sri Lanka are flying helicopter operators. And when you come to those, what are the sets of rules and regulations that they have that are different from the fixed wing aircrafts?
Of course, they are, as far as the normal aviation regulations apply to those as well, but they have more flexibility, obviously, because of the type of aircraft, you see.
So for those having set routes, do they have to get cleared? No, right?
They have to get cleared.
Every
Every flight has to be cleared by the Civil Aviation Authority.
Every flight taking place in Sri Lanka has been...
Every civilian flight.
Every civilian flight.
taking place has to be cleared by Civil Aviation Authority.
That's a great one. Now of course, you might have some plans that actually want to take place in the Civil Aviation Authority that sometimes maybe not able to be discussed here, right?
Most of it is public news.
Most public news. Now, your experience developing the Civil Aviation Authority and of course being there, apart from the last couple of months, what changes have you seen in the domestic sector?
Domestic sector, of course, the cost factor has been always a drawback, you see, because to start an airline, make it operational, involves a huge amount of capital, and also there would be operational issues, getting the proper staff and getting the proper organizational setup, you see, maintenance organized and all that. So because of those restrictions, the number of players are limited, you see, and they are quite because of these cost factors, they sort of take a little time to develop from one stage to another.
Still, I guess it's a very expensive game, and I think
capital cost is very high, you see, and it takes at least a few years for it to make make operational profit, you see.
Yeah. Now, of course, talking about the civil aviation industry, I mean, there are a lot of industry, there are a lot of people you guys are responsible to. Who do you answer to? What ministries do the civil
transport and civil aviation?
Minister of State. So they regulate the policies and you implement them. And what is the relationship? You actually mentioned ICAO at the beginning of the program, which is an international body. So they have policies, and Sri Lankan Air Force, Sri Lankan government also has some policies.
Yes, actually, we help to determine the Sri Lankan aviation policies. In fact, last year, an aviation policy for Sri Lanka was established. Now it's awaits implementation at the moment. So, and the Civil Aviation Authority was responsible for the formulation of that policy and getting the necessary approvals from all the stakeholders, including the users as well as the state. It was approved by Parliament, it was approved by the Cabinet as well. So it's now remains to be implemented. That's a general policy for civil aviation for this country. So now what our main task is to see that the international requirements, that is, those are formulated by ICAO, as I mentioned, are strictly adhered to, and there's a continuous audit by ICAO. The ICAO audits all the member states to see whether their standards are adhered to and applied. So, and now 2016 we had a special audit here. A team of ICAO officials came and they were with us for about 6 weeks and did a thorough audit, and we are quite happy to say that Sri Lanka became number 1 in South Asia and number 6 in the South Asian Pacific region.
Oh, wow.
And number 19 internationally out of the 192 countries. So that's a certain amount of respect Sri Lanka has earned in the civil aviation industry.
Now, of course, the aviation industry was sometimes maligned and a little bit put towards the side when you consider the tourism industry, but it is a huge part of the tourism industry.
Yeah, but there can't be a tourism industry without an aviation industry.
Yeah.
So being an island, you know, how many people come here by sea?
Yeah. Now, again, I'd like to move into the little bit of the regulation side. Now, these days, you did mention about the cost of aviation, but with new technologies, there have been a little bit of development in cheaper aircrafts, or not aircrafts, maybe drones. Like, I'm talking about drones in the sense they're very affordable, some of them.
Yes.
Now, they also sometimes fall under the civil aviation regulation.
Any flying object.
Any flying object.
Falls under the civil aviation.
So hot balloons, paramotors,
Yeah,
everything is.
is.
So what are the new sets of challenges?
We are the agency to safeguard our sky.
Yeah. So what are the except kites, I guess.
Yeah, except kites, but
kites.
even kites are not allowed to go near the airport.
Yeah. Talking about the drones and such that are coming in,
Yes.
what are the challenges you guys have faced?
Drones, the challenges, because drones are very difficult to regulate, you see, because you can go to PETA and buy a drone for a reasonable amount of money. You see, I think from 3,000 rupees onwards, there are drones of various sizes and capacities. You see.
Yeah.
So, unlike an aircraft, it's difficult to regulate the usage of drones. That is why after the 21st April bomb attacks, we have suspended all drone operations because of that, because we still cannot afford to take that risk of having flying objects without control in the skies. You see. But we hope to, in the near future, to streamline the process and allow operations under strict guidance by the Civil Aviation Authority.
Yeah. So other than that, I guess all the regular aircraft operations are back to normal
Yeah,
before,
back to normal.
before
Should be back to
pre-21st
normal, yes.
April. All right. So that was Mr. Ananda Wimalasena. He is the chairman of the Civil Aviation Authority. Pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much.
It was a great discussion. We will be back with the market update segment after this break. Welcome back to Business Today. We are moving on to the market discussion segment, and this is a very important discussion. If you have a small startup or a small or medium-sized business, you should actually pay attention to this particular discussion. We have in the studio very familiar face, but a more familiar voice at Business Today. Sharaj Obesekar used to join us all of the time for the stock market update. He is from the Colombo Stock Exchange, and he is issuer and public relations officer at the CAASL. Great to have you here, Sharaj.
Good to be here.
Sharaj, first of all, now we are talking about small and medium-sized businesses, or called SMEs, right?
Yeah,
particular vernacular is that what is the state of SMEs in Sri Lanka?